Theodora's life is a paradox wrapped in purple silk. Born the daughter of a bear-keeper, paraded as a child through the hippodrome, selling her body to survive, she rose not only to the throne, but to the heart of an empire. Her story is not one of redemption. She did not wash away her past with piety or submission. She weaponized it. She remembered the humiliation, the jeers, the helplessness, and she forged them into a crown. To the church fathers she was scandal. To the poor women she sheltered, she was salvation. To her enemies, she was venom. To Justinian, she was the difference between a throne that fell and one that stood. Centuries later, when scholars write of emperors and generals, Theodora still burns through the page, not as a wife, not as a saint, but as the woman who looked at empire, looked at power, looked at history itself and said, "I will not bow." The woman who refused to bow. Constantinople, 548 CE. The Hagia Sophia is heavy with incense and grief. The marble floors echo with footsteps as courtiers, priests, and guards gather in hushed tones. Outside, the city murmurs like an uneasy tide, citizens whispering that the Empress is gone. Within the imperial palace, Justinian sits alone, bent and broken, staring at nothing. He has ruled for decades, but today he is only a widower. His empress, Theodora, his partner in power, his shield in rebellion, his iron voice when his own faltered, has died. She is only 48 years old. To her enemies, her death is divine justice, an end befitting a woman once branded a prostitute and circus performer. To her admirers, she is a saint who stood unflinching when all others bent. For the empire itself, she is a paradox, both scandal and salvation. And yet the question lingers, echoing through the vaulted domes of the Hagia Sophia. How did she rise? How did a girl born in the hippodrome's gutters, forced onto the stage, sold into men's beds, ascend to rule half the known world? To understand Theodora's life, you must walk back from the cathedral's shadow to the circus sands of Constantinople in the year 500 CE. The hippodrome is the city's beating heart. Chariots thunder around its oval track, their wheels spitting dirt as rival factions roar from the stands. The air smells of sweat, horses, and wine. Banners of blue and green ripple in the wind as men gamble fortunes and hurl insults across the aisles. And among the bear trainers, dancers, and animal tamers, a little girl named Theodora learns her first lessons about survival. Her father, Acacius, is a bear-keeper, part of the brutal entertainment machine that feeds the hippodrome. His job is to control the hulking beasts paraded for the crowd's amusement, sometimes forced to fight, sometimes chained and mocked. When Acacius dies, Theodora is barely 5. Her mother, left desperate, remarries another trainer and struggles to keep her daughters fed. Theodora is pushed onto the stage almost before she can walk. She and her sisters, Comito and Anastasia, become performers, though in Byzantium, actress is a word that carries the weight of both spectacle and shame. To act is to entertain is to expose your body, and in the eyes of respectable society, to expose your body is to fall into disgrace. Theodora grows up in a world where men drink, shout, and reach for her before she even understands what they want. By her early teens, she is both performer and prostitute, her beauty whispered about in back alleys, her sharp wit noted by men who pay for more than her company. The circus gives her no privacy, no protection, but it gives her something else, the ability to read a crowd, to gauge desire, to see the hidden currents of power. The historian Procopius, writing in his venomous secret history, paints her as a monster of lust, recounting lurid tales of her performances and appetites. He describes her on stage, writhing with geese and shamelessly flaunting herself before the masses. Yet even in his slanders, a truth flickers through. Theodora captivated audiences. Whether they adored or despised her, they could not look away, and Theodora learned. She learned that beauty was a weapon, that words could wound sharper than blades, that wit could buy survival. She also learned that men could be deceived, flattered, outmaneuvered. For a girl with no dowry, no inheritance, and no name beyond scandal, cunning was coin. By the time she is 15, Theodora has become more than an actress. She is a courtesan, moving among men of wealth and rank. She watches them boast, betray, and barter, and she files every detail away. Yet she also feels the cost, the stares that never see her as human, the mockery that follows her like a shadow. She is both desired and despised, and in that contradiction she begins to forge steel within herself. But Constantinople can devour even the clever. By her late teens, Theodora finds herself entangled with a provincial governor named Hecebolus. He takes her to North Africa as his mistress, but when their affair sours, she is abandoned, destitute in a foreign land. For most women in her position, this would be the end, a slow descent into obscurity or death. For Theodora, it is the beginning. She claws her way back, surviving through menial work, perhaps even begging, but also through something deeper: reinvention. Somewhere in this period she encounters Monophysite Christianity, a theology that insists on Christ's single divine nature, rejected by the Orthodox mainstream. For a woman shamed by her past, Monophysitism offers something radical: forgiveness, purpose, dignity. Theodora embraces faith with the same intensity she once embraced survival. She is still young, still beautiful, but now her sharp edges are tempered with conviction. She begins to move not as a courtesan, but as a penitent, her past scandalous, but her present undeniable. By the time she returns to Constantinople, Theodora is transformed. The circus girl, the prostitute, the discarded mistress, those identities still cling to her name, whispered by enemies for decades to come. But behind her eyes burns a different fire. She walks through the city, not as prey, but as someone who knows where she is going. And in the palace, Justinian, the man who will be emperor, takes notice. Theodora returns to Constantinople around 520 CE, a woman in her early 20s with the kind of beauty that draws stares but the kind of bearing that makes men look away first. She takes up residence near the women's quarter by the Whoremisters' palace, spinning wool to earn her living. To most observers, she is just another penitent woman trying to disappear into quiet work. But Constantinople is a city of whispers, and the whispers about her are impossible to silence. That one, over there, she used to dance in the hippodrome. She used to be Hecebolus' mistress. She used to... For some, that used to is a brand of shame. For others, it is intrigue, and for one man in particular, it is destiny. Justinian is the nephew of Emperor Justin I. Born a peasant in Illyria, he rose to power through his uncle's adoption, his talent for law, and his relentless ambition. By the time Theodora returns, Justinian is already shaping imperial policy, drafting laws and maneuvering through court with the precision of a master tactician. He is also unmarried. When Justinian meets Theodora, whether by chance, through mutual acquaintances or by deliberate seeking out, we cannot know. What is certain is that he sees in her something few others ever bothered to look for: intelligence. She is quick, sharp, and unafraid to speak her mind. She can cut through flattery with a single glance and hold her own in conversations most women are excluded from. For Justinian, Theodora is more than a companion. She is an equal. The gossip begins at once, a statesman of rising stature taking up with a woman of such a past. The patriarch himself raises an eyebrow. Court rivals whisper that Justinian has lost his senses, but Justinian doesn't care. For all his cunning, he is also a man who believes in signs, in destiny, in the hand of God guiding his reign. And he believes Theodora has been placed beside him for a reason. There's a problem. Roman law forbids men of high office from marrying actresses, a category that includes courtesans. It is a legal wall designed to keep scandal from contaminating the aristocracy. For Justinian, that wall is an inconvenience, not a barrier. He petitions his uncle to change the law. Emperor Justin, fond of his nephew and aware of his importance, agrees. The law is rewritten and the barrier falls. In 525 CE, Justinian marries Theodora. She is about 25. He is in his 40s. Their union is not just a marriage, it is a declaration. He does not simply take her as mistress, he crowns her as wife. And when Justinian ascends the throne 2 years later, Theodora ascends with him. The coronation of 527 CE is a spectacle of Byzantine grandeur. Incense fills the Hagia Sophia as priests chant liturgies older than the empire itself. Justinian stands robed in imperial purple, the diadem heavy on his brow. At his side, Theodora wears the same purple, a signal no one can mistake. She is not simply consort, she is Augusta. Equal in dignity, equal in authority. The crowd watches with divided hearts. To some, she is an abomination, a woman raised from the gutter, now walking on mosaicked floors beside the emperor. To others, she is a miracle, proof that destiny can raise anyone, no matter how humble or despised. To Theodora herself, the coronation is vindication. Every jeer in the hippodrome, every sneer in the alleys, every hand that once reached for her without respect, she carries them all like stones now laid at the base of her throne. Theodora rules differently than Justinian. Where he is methodical, calculating, often hesitant, she is decisive, fiery, and unyielding. Together they are a paradox, his intellect married to her instinct, his caution balanced by her boldness. And when the great tests of their reign come, it is Theodora who will decide whether the empire stands or falls. But even before the riots, the wars, the plagues, Theodora begins to shape the empire in quieter ways. She champions women, pushing for laws that expand divorce rights, outlaw forced prostitution, and protect girls from exploitation. She establishes safe houses, convents in name but shelters in truth, for women fleeing abuse. She knows firsthand what it means to be cornered by men with power, and she refuses to let other girls live her story. At the same time, she does not abandon ambition. Theodora is not simply a patron saint of the downtrodden, she is a politician. She builds her own network of loyalists, places allies in court positions, and does not hesitate to crush rivals. Her enemies accuse her of cruelty, of vindictiveness, of carrying the scars of her youth into governance. Perhaps they are right. But cruelty in a woman on the throne looks different than cruelty in a man. For Justinian, ruthlessness is strategy. For Theodora, it is scandal. Still, she is unshaken. She knows that power never forgives the weak, and she refuses to be weak. And then comes the moment that will define her forever. In January 532 CE, the Hippodrome, the place of her childhood shame, erupts into chaos. The city's factions, the Blues and Greens, already notorious for their riots, unite in fury against Justinian's heavy taxation and his harsh governance. The Nika riots explode, Constantinople burns, the palace itself is threatened. Justinian, panicked, considers fleeing the city. The empire is moments away from collapse. It is Theodora who stands, eyes burning, voice like iron. She tells her husband, his generals, his advisers, "Flight may save your life today, but it will destroy your reign tomorrow. As for me, I will not live without my crown. Royalty is a fine burial shroud." The words freeze the room. Justinian falters, then steadies. He orders Belisarius and his generals to act. Troops storm the Hippodrome, slaughtering thousands. The rebellion is drowned in blood. The throne survives, not because of Justinian's brilliance, but because Theodora refused to bow. From that day on, no one doubts her place. The former actress, prostitute, and circus girl is now not just empress, but the empire's anchor. The Hippodrome still stank of blood when order returned to Constantinople. Nearly 30,000 men, women, and children lay dead in the sand and streets around the stadium, their corpses carted off, their names unrecorded, but the throne endured. And with it, Theodora's reputation was sealed. To her enemies, she was ruthless, a woman who had whispered death into her husband's ear and unleashed the swords of Belisarius without flinching. To her allies, she was salvation, the one who had steadied the emperor when his crown trembled. From that day on, no one mistook Theodora for a silent consort. She built on her position. shaping law and society with both mercy and steel. She pressed Justinian to expand protections for women, forbidding the coercion of actresses into prostitution, establishing convents as sanctuaries, granting wives more rights in divorce. She turned her own scars into policy, each decree an answer to the life she had once endured. But power never travels alone. It comes tied to religion, and in Byzantium, religion was war. The empire was fracturing over Christ's nature. Was he human and divine, or divine alone? Chalcedonian versus Monophysite. To most, it seemed like angels on the head of a pin. To Byzantium, it was a knife to the throat. Provinces rose in revolt, bishops thundered rival sermons, armies muttered about God's true will. Justinian was Chalcedonian. Theodora leaned Monophysite. Their marriage was not just political, it was theological tension under one roof. Yet here, too, Theodora showed her brilliance. She sheltered dissident clergy in the palace, smuggling bishops through secret corridors, protecting monks the empire branded as heretics. She played a dangerous game, balancing her husband's orthodoxy with her own conviction that God's truth had been betrayed by the Council of Chalcedon. To Theodora, this wasn't just theology, it was survival. The women and men who had been cast out, who found refuge in her protection, became her allies, her faction, her shadow court. One bishop she saved, Severus of Antioch, would later call her the shining jewel of the faith. Others called her a corrupter, a serpent in purple robes. Theodora didn't care. She had learned long ago that a woman could not survive by being beloved. She could only survive by being indispensable. By the 540s, Justinian's empire stretched wide. His armies reclaimed North Africa from the Vandals, marched into Italy, battled Persians in the east. His building projects transformed Constantinople, none greater than the Hagia Sophia, the great church whose dome seemed to float on light. His laws, codified in the Corpus Juris Civilis, would outlive him by centuries. But for Theodora, triumph came at a price. Her health began to fail. The sources whisper of a wasting illness, perhaps breast cancer, that gnawed at her strength, even as she continued to appear in public, regal, unbowed. In council, she was still fire. Propping herself up on cushions, she listened to generals and bishops, cutting through hesitation with the same ferocity that had once stilled the emperor in the face of the Nika riots. But in private, she weakened. The woman who had danced on stage, who had faced down mobs, who had out-argued patriarchs, now struggled to climb palace stairs. And yet, she never retreated. Even in illness, Theodora remained Justinian's partner. Not ornament, not shadow, partner. Their marriage was not without fracture. He leaned on other advisers, sometimes strayed into the arms of other women. She, too, wielded her own faction and pursued agendas that undercut his. But when the empire tottered, they leaned back into each other, bound not just by affection, but by shared survival. Her enemies thought death would silence her. It did not. In 548 CE, Theodora died in the palace at the age of 48. Justinian wept, though he lived another 17 years. He never remarried. He had taken concubines before, but he would never take another wife. In his grief, he raised monuments, continued laws she had inspired, and leaned on her memory as if she still whispered counsel in his ear. Theodora was buried in the Church of the Holy Apostles, her mosaicked face immortalized in Ravenna, staring out at history with eyes that still pierce. Theodora's legacy is not neat. It is not saintly. It is not even comfortable. She was ruthless, cunning, at times cruel. She wielded power in ways her enemies never forgave, but she also offered refuge, reformed laws, and refused to let her past dictate her worth. She proved that a woman could not only survive an empire built for men, but bend it, however briefly, to her will. She was born in the circus. She died in a palace. And between those two worlds, she carved a truth that Byzantium could never erase. Theodora would not bow. As the shadows lengthen and the stars begin to whisper, we close the pages of this ancient tale. In the hush of night, Truth rests where faith once stood strong. Sleep gently now, wrapped in the echoes of empires long gone. Until next time, when darkness falls and another lullaby of a fallen world begins.